welcome to Whispers of Ink. I'm Machado de Assis, and now I will read one of my stories.
Let's start with the book Identity, which is part of my novels collection. Chapter 1. Let's admit that complete physical similarity between two unrelated people is extremely rare. Maybe even rarer than a bad poet who finally decides to stay quiet. Personally, I've never met such a case. I've seen curious resemblances, sure, but never so perfect that you couldn't tell one person from the other. Within families, similarities are normal. That's what used to amaze the good old Montaigne. But today, even the simplest man finds it obvious. The Ossos, an ancient people whose women were shared among men, had a quick method to return children to their real fathers. They looked for a resemblance between the baby and any of the citizens. Let Herodotus take the blame for that. Back then, nature worked like a notary, trustworthy and precise. But when two people from completely different families and backgrounds look exactly like the same face, same height, same voice, everything's a phenomenon worth printing in bold letters, after living 3,000 years inside a papyrus scroll discovered in Thebes. Let the papyrus take the blame this time. Once upon a time, there was a pharaoh whose name has been lost to the darkness of ancient dynasties. Let's say, for the sake of story, that he was called Fëanor. He heard a rumor. Somewhere in Egypt, there lived a man who looked so much like him that even those closest to the pharaoh couldn't tell them apart. At first, he didn't care. But after a deep sadness, a kind of illness that had started to haunt him in his later years, he suddenly ordered 3 of his most trusted men to go and find this miracle. "Bring him to me," he said. "Give him whatever he asks for. If he has debts, pay them. If he loves a woman, bring her too. What matters is that he arrives here quickly. If he doesn't, he'll have you 3 executed." The palace was stunned. After 20 years of peaceful rule, it was the first death threat ever to come from the pharaoh's mouth. The court exhaled in joy and fear at once. Pharaoh Fëanor stood before his court, and all of them praised the punishment. A few even dared to suggest a symbolic ritual. Before sending the 3 messengers away, they should cut off their feet to show how little effort they had put into carrying out the pharaoh's orders. But Fëanor only smiled in his own quiet way. It wasn't long before the messengers returned to Memphis, bringing with them a man from the king's court, a lowly scribe named Bachtan. He had no family, no wife, no children, no debts, and no concubines. The city and the palace were stunned when he arrived. He looked exactly like the pharaoh. The only way to tell them apart was by their clothes. Bachtan might not have had the majesty or the presence of a king, but he carried himself with a calm and noble grace that made up for it. They were more than just similar. They were like 2 copies of the same person. Even they themselves could only tell each other apart by their sense of identity. Fëanor gave Bachtan a room right next to his own, saying it was for a matter of public importance. No one saw the scribe for 2 whole months. At the end of that time, Fëanor, who had taught Bachtan everything about running the kingdom, told him one night that he would sit on the throne of Egypt for months, maybe even years. Bachtan stared, confused. "You don't understand, scribe," said the pharaoh. I am the scribe now. You are the Pharaoh. You will take my name, my power, and my face. You must never reveal the truth about this switch. I'm leaving on matters of state. But, my lord, you will rule, or you will die. Rule then. Bakhtan obeyed, but begged the king not to stay away for too long. He promised to do his duty, but he had no love for power and had never been born to rule Egypt. They changed rooms. That night, Bakhtan tossed and turned in the pharaoh's bed, the bed that would one day belong to Cleopatra, unable to find comfort. The next morning, just as planned, the king left the palace dressed as a scribe. Bakhtan, now pretending to be pharaoh, gave him some money and many precious stones as a farewell gift. The sun hung low over the desert as 10 royal guards escorted the former pharaoh beyond the city's edge, their silence heavy with duty. As soon as the soldiers disappeared from sight, the man lifted his arms and cried out, "Live life!" His voice cracked with emotion. By the sacred names of Isis and Osiris, live life and be free. The only witness to these words his first to the world in many years was the hot, dry wind that swept across Egypt without care. The wind kept moving, indifferent to his joy, but you, dear reader, are not wind. You want to understand. At the very least, you suspect this man must be mad. And indeed, some ancient scholars believed he was. But thanks to the specialized doctors of the time, others argued his illness came from the stomach, or the bowels, or perhaps the heart. What illness exactly? Something strange. Imagine this. Pharaoh had begun his reign at 22, full of joy, open spirit, and determination. Everyone loved him. He had grand, useful, and deep ideas. But after only 2 years, he changed completely. He became bored, suspicious, and avoided people. He mocked them often, and worst of all, he fell into deep periods of sadness that could last for days. This lasted 18 years. As we already know, it was only after one of these dark episodes that he handed the rule of Egypt to a scribe. The reason behind this strange act was the same as the reason for his sudden change in nature. Pharaoh had become convinced that he could not truly understand people's hearts or characters through the formal, polished language they used around him. That language felt twisted, unclear, lifeless, and without contrast. He didn't expect them to speak harshly, or even tell him the full truth. But why wouldn't they show him their whole soul, without hiding the secret corners that exist in every house? Once this idea took root in his mind, he fell into a deep sadness and long periods of gloom. If the wise man who replaced him on the throne hadn't appeared when he did, Pharaoh might have died from despair. Pharaoh walked with a new spring in his step. He felt like flying, like running across the tin-colored sky above him. He imagined chatting with crocodiles, climbing onto hippos, or wrestling snakes from the ibises. "By the sacred bull Apis," he said out loud, waving his arms, being a king was no job at all. Now I carry my own joy, and I won't trade it for anything, not for Egypt, not for Babylon. Near the city gates, a weaver and his wife were having dinner by the door. The man pointed at Pharaoh and asked, "Charmian, who is that man walking with such joy?" Charmian turned her mysterious Nile eyes in the direction her husband pointed. When she saw him, Pharaoh was already coming closer. He had no place to stay yet, and he was hungry. But more than food, he wanted to feel what it was like to be just a man, to reach into people's hearts and understand their lives. "Excuse me," he said as he approached. "I'm a poor scribe. I carry a box of jewels given to me by the pharaoh himself because they say I look like him. But jewels do not fill the stomach." "We have fish and wine," said the weaver. "You may eat with us." The wine was sour, and the fish had been poorly dried in the sun. But to Pharaoh Noor, this simple meal tasted better than any feast in Memphis. It was his first dinner as a free man. He laughed, he talked, he asked questions. He wanted to know everything about the city, about the people, about life beyond the palace walls. He clapped the weaver on the shoulder like an old friend, and the weaver laughed too, telling stories with joy. "This city," said the weaver, "is full of thieves. And the worst of them live right here, near the gate. Let me tell you about a couple of them, and you'll know the rest." He told stories that were both silly and disgusting. Pharaoh Noor listened with a frown. To change the mood, he turned his eyes to Charmian. She had barely spoken, but she had not stopped looking at him with those deep, mysterious eyes of hers. He had not loved another woman like this. Looking at her, he felt younger as 42 years melted into 25. Meanwhile, the weaver kept talking about how bad his neighbors were, unaware of the effect his wife was having on their guest. Fanor walked through the city streets, shaking his head in disbelief. "Wicked people," he muttered under his breath. And those who went wicked were fools like that strange man Fataguru, for instance. What mysterious power could place such a beautiful creature among mere craftsmen? He thought to himself, still captivated by the image of Charmian. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow across the rooftops. Fainor thanked the weaver for his hospitality and tried to leave, but the man refused to let him go. "Stay the night," he insisted. He offered Fainor a modest but comfortable room. Charmian herself prepared the space with care, bringing him the finest thing she had. She laid a beautiful embroidered blanket on the badan of those famous Egyptian blankets once praised by Solomon and filled the air with delicate sweet scents. She didn't have much, but she loved luxury. Fainor lay down, but not to sleep. His thoughts were full of her. He was a man of principle. He felt guilty for even thinking of her like this, as if he were betraying the kindness of her husband. Again and again, he pushed her image from his mind. But her eyes remained. In the darkness, he saw them staring at him, two glowing lights in the night. And then he heard her voice, soft and pleading. Startled, he jumped from the bed. Her eyes vanished, but her voice stayed. And strangely, it mixed with the voice of her husband. They couldn't be far away. He pressed his ear to the wall and listened closely. He heard the weaver trying to convince his wife to steal the box of precious stones from Fanor's room. "Well, make a big scene," he whispered. "Say thieves came in the night." Charmian resisted. He insisted. She begged. Fanor stood frozen. Who could have guessed the kind weaver, so polite and generous, would do such a thing? Fainor didn't sleep for the rest of the night. He paced the room, restless, hoping the man wouldn't come. At dawn, He packed his things and prepared to leave. The weaver tried to stop him, asking him to stay just one more day or even a few more hours. But Feanor would not change his mind. Charmian didn't support her husband's request, but she looked at Feanor the same way as the night before, her eyes fixed on him, silent and full of mystery. Before he left, Feanor gave her a gift, crystal earrings and a golden bracelet. She leaned close and whispered in his ear, "Oh no." He stepped into the city, found a new place to stay, made sure his belongings were safe, and then wandered into the streets, his heart heavy with questions. Feanor loved wandering the streets unnoticed, blending in with the crowd, talking freely to anyone and everyone without the burdens of titles or the stiff formality of court life. The whole city buzzed with excitement over the annual festival of Isis. People gathered in groups on the streets and at doorsteps, men, women, children, all laughing, chatting, and shouting like 1,000 devils. Feanor went everywhere. He checked the boats being prepared for the celebration, walked through the markets, and spoke to everyone he met. The language was rough, sometimes even crude. In the middle of the chaos, he got pushed and shoved more than once. These were his first real brushes with the crowd, and they hurt his pride more than his body. For a moment, he thought about going back home, but then he laughed at himself for being so sensitive and dove back into the noise. In the first street he entered, he saw 2 women fighting, locked in a furious tangle of fists and insults. They were strong and loud. A crowd had formed around them, cheering them on like people still do today with dogs in a fight. Feanor couldn't stand to watch. At first he tried to walk away, but pity for the 2 women overcame him. He pushed through the crowd, stepped between them, and pulled them apart. They fought back, trying to break free, but he was strong too. When they realized they couldn't reach each other anymore, they turned their anger on him. Feanor turned and walked off, but the women followed, shouting curses and throwing stones, all while the crowd laughed and pointed. He hurried away, they chased after him, and the insults and rocks followed him for a long time. One stone hit him in the neck. In leaving this place, he thought as he walked into his house. While tending to the wound, he decided, as soon as I heal, he'll board a ship. This really is a city of scoundrels. Just then he heard voices outside. A few minutes later, a judge walked into his house, followed by the 2 women and about 20 other people. The women claimed this man had attacked them, and all 20 witnesses swore the same thing. The judge listened to Feanor's explanation. When Feanor said that his best defense was the wound he had on his neck, the judge replied that the 2 women would certainly defend themselves and find him. Forgetting his temporary self-restraint, Feanor shouted that they should arrest the judge. "Another fine," the judge answered calmly. And the wounded man had no choice but to pay again, to keep his secret hidden. Back home, Feanor felt sad and defeated. 2 days later, he saw Charmian walk in, crying and full of tears. When she heard what had happened, she left everything behind her house. Her husband Dan came to take care of him. "Does it hurt a lot?" she asked. She wanted to drink the blood from his wound, as if it were the finest wine of Egypt, the finest wine in the world. She had brought a small bag with her personal things. "What about your husband?" Feanor asked. "You are my husband," she said. Feanor tried to answer, but her eyes held more than ever the ancient secrets of Egypt. And beyond those secrets, she had a plan. She had told her husband she was going with a friend's family to the festival of Isis. That was how she left home. "Look," she said, trying to gain his trust, "I brought my pair of castanets. I usually use them to dance and play along with flutes." "The boats leave tomorrow," she continued. "You'll rent one and we'll go not to Business, but to the most lonely and wild place I can find. That place will feel like the very lap of divine Isis herself." Love had made her blind. Fanor tried to step back to talk her out of it, but everything was already set. They needed money, so he went out to sell 2 precious stones. He had never known the value of such things. Some had been given to him, others bought for him by his servants. But when the first buyer offered him a price for the stones, Feanor turned away and walked off, even though the man kept calling him to come back and make the deal. He went to another man and told him what had just happened. "How can we stop crooks from taking advantage of honest people?" this man said, speaking in a sweet, soft tone. Feanor held up the stones and let the light catch their edges. The merchant studied them for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. "These are good," he said. "Very good, in fact. Tell me, do you have any special feeling for them?" Feanor shook his head. "Not really." "Why do you ask?" "Well," the merchant said with a grin, "I believe that when you love something, it makes it easier to sell. I can't explain why. It's just one of those things." Feanor crossed his arms. "Like I said, I don't care much for them." "Good," the merchant said. "Then let me give you a fair price." He looked up at the sky, as if the numbers were written there, and whispered some quick math to himself. Then he named a sum half of what the stones were truly worth. Feanor's eyes lit up. That first offer had been low, but this one was much better. He clapped his hands and agreed at once. With the coins in his pocket, he bought a sturdy boat made of fine acacia wood, freshly sealed and ready for the river. Then he returned to the inn where Charmian waited. She listened carefully as he told her everything. "That man," Feanor said proudly, "has a rare kind of honesty. Like a jewel all by itself." Charmian smiled and touched his cheek. "My golden son," she said gently, "those stones were worth twice as much." Feanor stood up, furious. "What? Then I must go back and—" But she held him back. "No, love. It's too late now. And it won't change anything. We leave tomorrow." He sat back down, still upset, but she was right. The next morning came, and they stepped into their new boat. Among the many boats heading toward Business, they slipped away unnoticed. They traveled far and finally reached a quiet city far from the noise and dust. There, they found a small but lovely home, a true nest for 2 hearts. "We'll live here forever," she whispered to him. She was no longer the poor girl with nothing. Now, she could rival the richest women of Memphis. She wore fine jewels, soft robes, and used sweet-smelling oils. Bronze mirrors stood in every room, and rich carpets covered the floors. She had servants, some from Egypt, some from Ethiopia. But the finest jewel, she told Feanor, the softest carpet, the truest mirrorio are all of those things to me. They didn't stay alone for long. Even though they wanted privacy, friends came to visit. Among them were two men. One was an old scholar, and the other was a young traveler who had seen Babylon and many other lands. At dinner, the young man would often speak of his journeys, and Charmian and her friends would listen with delight. Fanor, meanwhile, would sit with the old scholar and talk for hours, finding joy in every word the man spoke. Fanor had been working on a book about the origins of the Nile for many years. Even though no one had ever read it, people believed it was brilliant. Fanor wanted to hear a part of it, so the scholar invited him to his home early one morning to read a few pages. The scholar opened his book and began with a long discussion about the origin of the earth and the sky. Then came another chapter on the origin of seasons and winds. Then another about the origin of rituals, oracles, and the priesthood. After 3 hours they stopped to eat something and started the second part of the book. This part was about the origins of life and death. It was so deep and complex that they couldn't finish it before night fell. Fanor stood up, frustrated. "Well, continue tomorrow," the scholar said. "After this part, he'll move on to the origin of men, the origin of kingdoms, the origin of Egypt, the origin of the pharaohs, my own origin, the origin of all origins, and only then will we get to the main topic of the book, the origins of the Nile. But before that, he'll explain the origins of every river in the universe. What did you think of what I read?" Fanor could not answer. He left the house furious. In the street, he felt dizzy and fell to the ground. When he woke up, the moon was shining. With great effort, he got up and walked home. "What a trickster! What a snake!" he muttered. "If I were king, I wouldn't let you bore me for more than half an hour. Oh, freedom! You promised me peace, but brought me chains." Thinking like this, he missed Memphis, the power he had given the scribe, and even the men who once trembled when they spoke to him, men he had run away from. He had traded everything for nothing. But now, he thought, things could change. Charmian was worth everything. It had already been months since they started living together. It was the nosy people, the gossiping women and the jealous men, who ruined their happiness. All those petty fights and rumors had nothing to do with their love. He made a new plan. They would leave the city. They could not live for themselves there. They would go somewhere poor and quiet, far from everyone else. Fanor walked slowly through the streets, his heart heavy with longing. "What good are riches or idle talk?" he muttered to himself. "What good is any of this when she's gone?" He hummed a tune as he walked, something soft and sad, beautiful Charmian, lone palm tree, standing in the sun of Egypt. When he got home, he rushed to their shared room, hoping to comfort her, to wipe away her tears. But she wasn't there. Nothing was. No Charmian, no jewels, no fine clothes, no mirrors, no treasures of any kind. Not even the young traveler who had, with all his talk of Babylon, likely stirred in her the dream of going there together. Fanor fell apart. He wept tears of anger, tears of love. He could not sleep that night. The next day he asked everyone he could find, but no one had seen her. No one knew anything. He sold what little furniture and rugs he had left, and moved to a small town nearby, still hoping to find her. He felt broken, lost, and full of sorrow. To keep his mind busy and to heal his pain, he became an apprentice embalmer. "Death will teach me how to bear life," he told himself. The embalming house was one of the most famous in the region. It served not only the rich, but also the poor and those in between. Since the prices for second and third class embalming were the same as those of other places, many families sent their dead here, hoping they might rest among the noble and wealthy. Fanor started working with the lowest class of bodies. He noticed quickly that the embalmers of the lower class, like himself, were treated with little respect by those in the second class. Those from the second class tried to act close to the first class embalmers, but the first class ignored them all. This didn't bother him much. Whether or not they removed the intestines, whether they used cedar oil or palm wine, myrrh or cinnamanthes were just differences in the process and cost. But something else truly upset him. He had come here looking for a place of quiet sadness, a workshop of sorrow. Instead, he found a market full of jokes and laughter. There was still respect when a body arrived if everyone acted serious, with deep faces and careful hands. But once the door closed, the mood changed. The embalmers talked and laughed like it was just another job. That was not what he had expected. That was not the peace he had hoped to find. Fanor soon found himself alone again, once the relatives had gone. And just like before, the joy returned. Whenever a young and beautiful woman passed away, people would gather around, admiring her beauty, talking about her life. Everyone had something to say. One person remembered a story, another corrected it, adding a new detail. The men worked on the bodies with jokes and casual talk, sharing their own plans and dreams, jumping from one subject to another like a tailor cutting cloth. Fanor began to understand. Time had hardened these people's hearts. Their pity and sensitivity had worn thin. Maybe he'll end up like them, he thought quietly. He left the funeral home after waiting a while, hoping to see the body of the lovely Charmian. But she never came. He tried other jobs. He became a barber, then a boatman, and later a hunter of water birds. After a time, he grew tired of the work, tired of the world, tired of pretending. Memories of his old life began to pull at him. He missed the palace, the power, the respect. He decided to return to Memphis and take back what was once his. When the city saw him again, the people shouted with excitement. "It's him, the scribe who looked like the pharaoh," they said. "He's back." Groups formed in the streets. A crowd followed him all the way to the palace. "So much alike," people cried from every corner. "Isn't it amazing?" Fanor smiled, but he asked, "Really?" A kind old man stepped forward. "The only difference," he said gently, "is that the pharaoh is very fat." Fanor froze. A chill ran down his spine. Very fat? Then there was no way anyone could confuse them now. He stopped walking for a moment, thinking. But he told himself, no. He'll go in anyway. He'll face him. He'll find out the truth. Why hide it any longer? Inside the palace, the court was waiting. They stood around the pharaoh when Fanor arrived. And yes, now that they stood side by side, no one could mistake them. The bodies were too different. But the face, the way they spoke, The way they moved those were still the same. Bakhtan, the pharaoh, looked at him calmly. "What is it you want?" he asked. Fa-Nor lifted his chin. He felt like a king again. "I want the throne," he said. "Leave now, scribe," he added, his voice firm. "Your part is over." Bakhtan turned to the others and smiled. Then he laughed. And the others laughed too. The palace shook with their laughter. Pharaoh clenched his fists. He pointed at them all, angry and helpless. But the court kept laughing, not afraid, not moved. Pharaoh stood before the court, his back straight and his eyes full of fire. Bakhtan, once amused by the man's bold words, now wore a serious face. He looked at the crowd, then at the pharaoh, and spoke with a voice that cut through the silence like a blade. "This man," Bakhtan said, pointing at Pharaoh, "is not a poet. He is a rebel. His words are not songs, but weapons. He speaks of freedom in a land that has no room for it. He stirs the hearts of the weak and the restless. That is not art. That is treason." The room fell still. The pharaoh gave no sign, but the guards stepped forward. Fa-Nor did not move. He only smiled. They tried him that very day. There was no long trial, no long debate. The verdict came fast. Death. At dawn the next morning, the crowd gathered near the palace. The sun had just risen, painting the sand in gold and red. Fa-Nor stood tall on the platform. His hands were bound, but his spirit was not. He looked at the scribe who had written his name in the book of the dead. He looked at the soldiers, the priests, the pharaoh himself. And then his eyes found hers. "Charmian," he whispered, almost too low for anyone to hear. "Beautiful Charmian. The only palm tree in this desert. The only shade in this heat." Then he laughed. A long, full laugh. The kind that says more than words. The moment his breath left him, the silence broke. "Long live Pharaoh!" the crowd cried out. It was not a cry of sorrow. It was a cry of pride, of awe. Even Bakhtan could not hide his smile. He bowed slightly, as if in thanks. Not to the man who had died, but to the moment that would live on.
Thank you for listening so far. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like our channel and click the bell to be notified whenever a new book is read. Have you heard of Machado de Assis? Machado de Assis, born in Rio de Janeiro in 1839, is considered one of the greatest writers in Brazilian literature and a master of psychological realism. He was a novelist, poet, playwright, and short story writer whose works explore the complexities of human behavior with irony, subtlety, and deep introspection. Among his most famous novels are Dom Casmurro, which questions truth and memory, and the posthumous memoirs of Brás Cubas, a satirical narrative told by a deceased man. Machado's literature often reflects the contradictions of Brazilian society, addressing issues like race, class, power, and identity in a sophisticated yet accessible style. Despite being born into poverty and facing racial prejudice, Machado de Assis rose to become the president of the Brazilian Academy of Letters and a symbol of literary excellence. His sharp wit and profound observations about society and the human soul make his works timeless and universally relevant. Today, he is recognized not only as a Brazilian icon, but also as a world-class author whose legacy continues to influence generations of writers and thinkers. Machado de Assis shows us that literature can be both elegant and critical, intimate and universal, humorous and profound. His stories remain as powerful and thought-provoking today as they were more than a century ago. Machado is a treasure of world literature, and through his voice, we discover the infinite layers of the human experience.